A train stopped in the middle of Siberia, not because it had arrived, not because there was a station ahead. It stopped because there were too many bodies in the cars to continue. Guards opened the doors. The dead were unloaded beside the tracks. The train moved on. The living watched from inside the cars as the bodies of their family members disappeared into the Siberian landscape. This is not a story about soldiers. This is not a story about the Holocaust. This is a story about an entire civilian population that two countries decided did not deserve to exist. And almost nobody knows their name. In 1762, Catherine the Great sent a letter across Europe. She was Russian by title and German by birth, and she needed farmers. The vast steppes along the Volga River were empty and productive, and she was offering land, religious freedom, and exemption from military service to anyone willing to come. Hundreds of thousands of German families accepted. They packed their tools, their seeds, and their faith, and they crossed the continent. They built villages along the Volga that looked like villages in Bavaria. They kept their language. They kept their customs. They kept their church records in German for 150 years. They called themselves the Volga Germans, and for 5 generations they farmed some of the most productive land in Russia. They were not visitors. This was home. Then 1914 came. Germany and Russia went to war, and suddenly the Volga Germans were suspects. They had German names. They spoke German at home. They were the wrong kind of people at the wrong moment in history. The Tsar's government began seizing their farms. The revolution that followed made everything worse. The Bolsheviks collectivized the land they had spent generations building. The famine of 1921 killed tens of thousands in the Volga German settlements alone. And through all of it, they stayed. They adapted. They survived. They built a Soviet autonomous republic on the Volga, the only German-language administrative region in the entire Soviet Union. They believed that proved something. They believed that after everything, they had finally earned the right to stay. They were wrong. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Within weeks, Stalin had made a decision. On August 28, 1941, the Soviet government issued Decree 941-222. It accused every Volga German of being a potential saboteur and spy. The decree offered no evidence. It named no individuals. It required no trial. It condemned an entire people by the country their ancestors had left 2 centuries before. The autonomous republic was dissolved overnight. NKVD officers arrived in the villages before dawn. Families were given between 1 hour and 2 hours to gather what they could carry. Whatever they left behind was confiscated before they reached the road. Children were told they were going somewhere better. The trains were waiting. The cattle cars had no windows. A single hole had been cut in the floor as a toilet. 1 bucket of water was shared between 40 people. The trains moved east for weeks. The guards did not open the doors at night. When someone died inside the car, the body stayed with the living until the next inspection stop. Witnesses who survived described the smell as something they never stopped remembering. The trains crossed the Ural Mountains. They crossed the West Siberian plain. They stopped in places that had no names on any map the deportees had ever seen. When the doors finally opened, the guards pointed at the tree line and said, "This is where you live now." There were no buildings. There was no shelter. The first winter arrived before they could build walls. People dug into the frozen ground and pulled branches over their heads and called it shelter because there was no other word available. The Soviet government called this process special settlement. In practice, it was a system of forced labor with a death rate the state never officially recorded. The Volga Germans were assigned to Siberian coal mines, lumber camps, and munitions factories. They were counted every week like inventory. They could not leave without written permission. They could not send letters without censorship. Their children were barred from higher education. They were not prisoners in name. They were prisoners in every other way that mattered. Historians estimate that between 1941 and 1948, somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 Volga Germans died inside the special settlement system. The Soviet archives that might confirm the true number have never been fully opened. What survived were letters people managed to smuggle out through strangers. What survived were testimonies recorded decades later by people who had been children on those trains. What survived were names scratched into the wood of barrack walls that no longer exist. Stalin died in 1953. The special settlement restrictions were gradually lifted, but the Volga Germans were not allowed to return to the Volga. Their villages had been given to other settlers. Their republic had been erased from every Soviet map. Their property had been redistributed down to the last tool in the last barn. The Soviet government acknowledged that the deportation had been unjust. It offered no land back. It offered no homes back. It offered no compensation of any kind. It simply said, "You may live wherever you like now, except where you came from." A community of survivors scattered across Siberia, Kazakhstan, and Central Asia, carrying a language the country around them did not speak and a homeland that no longer existed anywhere except in memory. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many of the Volga German descendants looked west. Germany had a repatriation program for ethnic Germans from the former Soviet states. They applied. Many were denied. After 150 years of maintaining their identity against every pressure imaginable, their German had drifted. Their customs had evolved under Soviet conditions. Officials told some families that they did not qualify as German enough to return. 230 years after Catherine the Great had invited their ancestors to come and build her empire, the descendants of those builders belonged to no country on earth. The Soviets had told them they were enemy Germans. The Germans told them they were not German enough. A people who had survived revolution, famine, deportation, and forced labor had been rejected by both the nation that erased them and the nation that should have claimed them. They had done everything asked of them across 2 centuries in 2 countries. And at the end of it, neither country wanted them. The train cars have rotted now. The lumber camps are overgrown. The Volga villages their great-great-grandparents built are occupied by people who never heard the names of those who built them. But the testimony exists. The deportation orders were signed, stamped, and filed in Soviet archives. The names of those who died are still being recovered by descendants searching government records across 3 countries. History tried to erase these people twice. The first time with cattle cars and Siberian winters. The second time with a bureaucratic letter that said, "You are not who you think you are." Both times, they refused to disappear. If this is the first time you are hearing this story, that is not an accident. Someone decided this did not deserve to be remembered. Share this video and prove them wrong. And drop the word erased in the comments below.